Hello class, welcome to chapter 5. Just to give you a little bit of overview to this, and again, as I said in the last chapter, hopefully we'll have the chapter videos from the author of our textbook that I can present. I was able to adjust the lighting a little bit, so now I have the top of my head back, and so I hope this looks a little bit better for you and so forth. But want to just give an overview of what we'll be looking at in this particular chapter. We're really looking at the sources that come together for the New Testament, and those are biblical sources and also what's called extra-biblical, or not that it's more biblical, but that it's outside of the Bible. And so we have Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John who give us the life of Christ and talk to us about that, but there are also many others authors who write little snippets of things that tell us about Christ as well, so forth. And so we use all of those resources to reconstruct something together. But the reality is they don't confirm that Jesus lived, or that he made was a public figure, that he lived, that he died, and so on and so forth. We need all of those things together to stand and do that. So we have one of the first things it talks about is agrapha, which is Greek for unwritten kinds of things, and this was kind of the tradition of things as they were put together and so forth. Then we have also other things that are called the collection of sayings of Christ, and some of these have received some pretty good press recently. The Gospel of Thomas is a classic example of that. But the Gospel of Thomas is not included in our New Testament because it didn't meet the criteria that we talked about in the last chapter. And then we have the apocryphal Gospels, those that are not believed to be true, and very few of them survived, and if they did, they're mainly looked at as not being the kind that could make it into the New Testament. The bulk of this chapter is on higher criticism, and I will give you that this is probably the darkest part of this whole textbook and this whole course. I can tell you from my own personal experience going through seminary that when I went through and took a class on biblical criticism, it was not a fun class at all, because basically what you're trying to do is prove that what we believe about Scripture is true, that its authenticity is true, the settings are true, it's consistent, all those kinds of things. And so we begin to ask questions about the original wording and how things disagree or not. The higher criticism is really the hardest part of it, and that's where we begin to see groups who want to, sometimes it's called demythologize Scripture, and so anything that can't be explained or doesn't occur normally is taken out of Scripture, so that removes oftentimes a lot of the miracles and things along those lines, and so that leaves us with a lot of holes if we adopt that kind of concept and so forth. So some scholars look at that and say, well, those things we can't validate, so they shouldn't be there. Others say, well, that's kind of the whole point, is that we can't validate them. Then there are a couple of hypotheses that are put together in the text, and the hypotheses are basically telling us, in a sense, of which came first, the chicken or the egg, or how did we get the Gospels in particular that we have, who wrote first, which one's the oldest, which one's the youngest, did one use the other one as a reference, and so on and so forth. And so Griesbach is one of the major people in the hypotheses and so forth, and he has, you can see the diagram and so forth within the textbook. And then there's the Markan priority, which would say that the Gospel of Mark is first written, and then the others came from it. It's not that they're in the order that they were written, so we don't have Matthew, Mark, then Luke, and John as chronologically the way they were written. It is likely that Mark is probably written first, and that Matthew and Luke used some of Mark in order to put it together, because we do find that these books are in agreement, and that's why they're called the Synoptic Gospels, because they see Christ pretty much from the same point of view, where John sees Christ very differently. Not that he's a different Christ, but just kind of turns the coin, or on the other side of the coin a little bit. Talks a little bit about a Q document. Maybe that was the source that Mark used, a collection of things put together, and Mark used that in order to put together the New Testament, so, and his gospel. And so we have the Q hypotheses as well, and so you'll learn a little bit about that. And then there's several elaborations of which came first and so forth, and you see the diagrams that are there, and just kind of think about them a little bit and see if you can figure out, well, did we have an outside source that came into this, or was it this one, then this, and so forth. And not that it ultimately matters, but it is something worth studying and looking at, so forth. So that's kind of the harder part. Then he talks a little bit more about the development of criticism and how it came together, and again focusing on the demythologizing of the Gospels that happened, and then evaluating the Gospels and various things in regards to that. And so that's pretty much the bulk of the chapter. There are some things at the end, some other kinds of higher criticism. There's about, seems like 50 of them or whatever, because we do criticize and analyze, really, Scripture, New Testament, from various points of reference. And so there are different types of critiques that are there, and it's good to know those as well. And then as we begin to move, we're going to be moving into Christ's life, and in particular as we go into the Bible in this next chapter that we go into, as we look at the life of Christ and kind of put the life of Christ together. So hopefully this chapter doesn't make you swear off on anything, and you can keep your head above the water and be able to do some good thinking about this and understanding some of the scholarly parts that are behind the Bible and the New Testament that we don't typically think about as we're just using the Bible on a regular basis. So hope you have a good day, and hope you're enjoying the class. And again, if you need anything, give me a holler, send me a message through Blackboard message, and I'll be glad to answer that for you. Thanks so much.